I'm going to show you the engine air filter replacement on a 2015 Volkswagen Passat with the Wolfsburg edition. It's a 1.8 turbo motor. Okay, now I'll show you some of the engine codes if I can get the camera to focus, and I'll show you some stuff about the car and the air filter so you get an idea we're talking about the right stuff. You can see the codes in the filter here. This is the engine air filter, and this matches exactly the one I took out, which was installed by the dealer. You see the codes in the upper right, 5C0129820, and then the codes down below. It's a Wix filtration filter. Match those codes and you've got the right air filter. I'm going to put that in the housing now. The air filter is under this cover right here. Okay, here's the air intake. This gets funneled into the housing and then gets filtered and then goes back out to the engine. Okay, now to remove this, there are some small screws that go all the way around it. Let's see if I can get this to focus all the way. You see that little star-shaped thing there? Okay, now honestly I forget what that little star-shaped deal is called, but I'll tell you what, I have a bunch of them. And the size you need is a T25. This is kind of what it looks like. See if I can get this to focus. This is a T25, that's the proper size. Fits right in there. And that's what we're going to use to unscrew that. Personally, I like to use the ratchet with an extension. It's a small ratchet. Makes it easier to access, makes it easier to get off. If you're looking for a set of these, it kind of looks like this. This is a whole set. Small ones. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and I'm going to find each one of these on this air filter housing, and I'm going to loosen them. Alright, so loosen them and then I'll be right back. The question is, how do you find the right air filter? Well, I did the research and it turns out Fram makes a compatible air filter and the code is CA9711. So I went to 3 different auto parts stores by 3 different companies and could not find that Fram. Went to Walmart, could not find that filter. So, being the crazy person I am, I went to the VW dealer and said, hey, you have an air filter I can buy from you? And guess what? They did. Crazy, huh? So I have the air filter, and guess what? I paid maybe a couple bucks more than I would have, because here's the thing, is I bought it, I didn't have to ship it, I have it today, I don't have to wait a week, so for a couple bucks either way, didn't really matter to me. So let me show you the air filter and where it goes. Okay, so here's the new air filter. Got this from the Volkswagen dealer. No big deal. Go into the parts department, tell them what you have for a car, or better yet, bring your registration with you. They'll punch in the VIN number and they'll come up with the proper air filter for your vehicle. It's that easy. They'll come up with the air filter, the oil, the whole 9 yards. Just buy it from them. I ended up paying about the same price. I went around and I loosened all these little screws that hold the housing down. Now, there are a couple right over here near the hose, so don't miss that, one on each side. Hidden down here in the back, so make sure you get a good light, make sure you can see, because you don't want to miss any of those little screws down in here that hold the housing. But make sure you're just getting the housing screws. Now, here's another thing you need to do. Is you see this clamp? We need to remove the air intake tube here from the housing. Okay? Now, believe it or not, they make a special tool for that. That special tool is called, okay, I have no idea. Keeping in mind this is a do-it-yourself video, okay? I'm not legally responsible for anything you choose to use as tools. And since I'm not going to go buy this tool, I'm simply going to put on my channel locks, spread this little puppy, move it up out of the way so I can remove, and that's going to spring on you. It's going to spring big, so be prepared for that, okay? Don't let it go. Be gentle. And then you'll be able to remove the air intake from that housing. Now I'm not going to remove it completely yet because I'm going to finish taking the screws out and I don't want a lot of debris in there. So I know I can remove it when I'm ready. There's also an air intake right here as a vacuum hose. Okay? So you want to, that just pops out. Might be on there kind of tight, so just wiggle it a little bit, apply a little pressure, and off it comes. Now make sure when you put this in here somewhere, you're pointing it down so it's not collecting debris while you're working on the motor here. Try and find a spot for it where it's not pointing in the up position. That's not too bad right there. That seems like it'll do okay. You just don't want it collecting debris. Alright, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around and I'm going to take all these out, and I'm going to separate this at the final stage and pull this back so I can get the filter out. The thing I want to mention is when you loosen these screws, they don't actually come all the way out of the housing. So when you're unscrewing those, when you're loosening them, you'll feel, all of a sudden they'll just kind of like, be kind of like hanging there. And when that happens, that means you've got it loose enough, and then you can just lift it up just a little bit and it will stay there. So these are all lifted out of place. So if I push that, it goes back down. I could just lift that up and right into place. They're designed so they don't actually come all the way out. So don't try to take them all the way out. You'll drive yourself crazy. So you wiggle this a little bit, and be gentle, and then move it back, and out it comes, and you've got access to your air filter. And if you all had fun with that one over a beer, listening to those particular words in that order, more fun for you. Here's the old air filter. You're just going to lift this out. Just lift it out like so. Out it comes. Find a good place for that. A good place for the old one is, the floor. Alright. So when you look in here, when you look at the manufacturer online, it says clean the inside of the housing and so forth when you take this out. And you can see there is some dirt and a little bit of debris in here. So I'm going to get one of those shop towels, and I'm going to just wipe this down and get some of the dust and debris out of here that might be in here. And then I'm going to wipe the inside of the cover. Wipe that out a little bit so it looks a little better. Get rid of some of the stuff. Now make sure when you do that you don't leave any parts of the towel behind. Don't rip the towel. Cleaning the inside of the housing, really what I did is I just went around the edges where the filter seats, and if I look down in here, this is fairly clean. I went around the edges a little bit on this. It's a little difficult to do because we didn't disconnect this hose right here. Okay, so you want to be careful of that. You don't break that or damage it in any way, so don't get too rough with this thing. And you can see there was a fair amount of dust and dirt in there. It doesn't have to be exactly perfect. It's an air cleaner. When you put the new cleaner in, it's supposed to filter the air. If you have one of those cans, you can blow some of the dust out. You want to try that, that's fine. Just get some of it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. When you put the new filter in, you just want to be sure that it sits all the way down. It should seat right along the edge right there. If it doesn't, just give it a little shake so it's all seated properly. It's not sticking up, something like that on one side. Make sure it's in there. And then we're going to just put the housing back on it, and we're going to make sure those screws all pop down, because they will pop. You have to give them a little pop down into place. But don't pop the screws down until you get the housing properly positioned. While you put the housing on, you can also fit the intake tube onto the housing so that you're not getting debris into that while you're working with this. Now if you want to, before you put it together, take a towel and just wipe the edges of the housing here so that you're not pushing dust and debris back in. Housing back on. I don't have the screws secured yet, and I haven't even pushed them down. It's a little bit of wiggling to get it in there. Now you don't want to pull on this, so what I did is tipped it kind of up in an angle so that the edge closest to you actually points down a little bit, and then this edge of the housing goes right under the air intake right here. And then you kind of you slide it in like that, and then pop it down like that. Be gentle with it. You don't want to ruin the air filter. Okay? So try to get it lined up, and then move it to where you need to move it to. Make sure, go around and inspect the edges, and make sure that you're not pinching the filter somewhere. Make sure that the housing is seated properly. Once the housing is seated properly, I then put the intake tube onto the end of the housing. I haven't yet clamped it down. We're going to do that in just a minute. But I've inspected everything. It looks good. So now I'm going to pop these screws down into place. These are going to just push right down to where they're supposed to be. You can hear them. Just give a little pop. Give a little wiggle if you need to. Give it a little wiggle. Just make it go down. Those will all pop right into place. If they don't pop into place, screw them a little bit. Just give them a little turn, and they'll go down. Just make sure you get all those down where they're supposed to be. There you go. So I'm going to tighten all the screws down Once I get the screws all tightened down, then I'm going to go ahead and put this back into place where it belongs here. Just, again, I'm going to use the channel locks to squeeze that together and just wiggle it into place right here. Okay? The way I like to do screws on big pieces like this, you have multiple screws going around a housing, is I make sure each one is in the right place and it seats. So what I do is when I'm screwing each one in, I go until it seats and then I stop. And especially on this, because it's just plastic. You don't need to go too tight on these. So make sure it goes down, make sure it seats, and go to each one around the housing. As you go to each one, then you make sure you get them in the right place. What you don't want to do is have one of these screws tightened down all the way, and then you find out another one doesn't line up. Then you get a problem. You got to go back and start unscrewing things. So just get each one, make sure you've got each one, don't forget the ones in the back here, okay, and go until they make contact. We're not going to tighten this very much, so once it makes contact, you're almost done. Okay, so that was the last screw to make contact. So I make contact, give that about a half a turn. Okay? Once it's made contact, give that about a half a turn. This is just plastic. You don't want to damage this. And this seats very well because you've got the big gasket around the filter. So once you make contact, just go half a turn. Now, is there a specific spec as far as foot-pounds or something, or NM that they used? I'm sure there is. So if you want to do this 100% right, and just like the book says, then you would go get yourself a torque wrench, figure out what it's supposed to be torqued to, and torque it down appropriately. Now, I've done these a number of times, and I feel that this works for me. So don't call my YouTube channel and decide you're going to sue me because you didn't torque it down correctly, and I didn't tell you to torque it down correctly. No, I didn't. This is a do-it-yourself job, okay? So do it yourself to whatever specs you think are appropriate. If you want to know how much to torque it down, then go get a torque guide. Now, let's not forget the vacuum hose here. We got the little vacuum hose over here, which I made sure it wasn't getting any debris in it. And then we're just going to put that back on. You're going to push that in all the way. You can see push that until it seats up against the housing, and then you've got good contact. You've got that where it's supposed to be. Okay, so then this next piece is probably one of the more challenging pieces, is to get this clamp back on the intake in the proper place. Requires quite a bit of reach in order to get it grabbed right. So let's see if I can do this with one hand. So actually, it's probably not a good idea. I'm going to do it with two hands. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, so that's it for the engine intake air filter. The housing's put back on. The screws are all screwed down. Okay, all the tubes are back where they belong. Vacuum tube is in there. Clamp is back on the air intake. Everything is good. We got a new filter in there. I'm going to collect the tools. Get this out of here, which I probably shouldn't have left here in the first place, but just light, empty cardboard. Oh well.